He was supposed to be scouting, a single soldier sent forward in the dark to see whether the town ahead was held in strength, to gather information and report back. That was the mission. Reconnaissance. Look, learn, return. Instead, this one man, blind in one eye, having been told he was unfit for the very kind of combat he kept volunteering for, walked into a town held by an entire enemy garrison, and, through sheer audacity and nerve, convinced them all to flee. By morning, the town was free, not because an army had taken it, but because one soldier had bluffed a garrison into believing an army was coming. It is one of the most astonishing feats of individual daring in the entire war, and the man who accomplished it should never, by the official standards, have been there at all. This is a story about audacity, about the extraordinary things that become possible when one person refuses to accept the limits that others place upon them. It is a story about a soldier who was told he was not fit to fight and who became one of the most remarkable warriors of the war, who turned his supposed disqualifications into irrelevancies through sheer force of will and courage. And it is a story about a single, almost unbelievable night when one man did what whole units might have struggled to accomplish and liberated a town through nothing but nerve, cunning, and an absolute refusal to be stopped. To understand the magnitude of what this soldier did, you first have to understand the man himself, because he was an unlikely hero in almost every respect. He had wanted to fight, had volunteered for combat, had wanted to serve in the most demanding roles, but he faced obstacles that, by any reasonable standard, should have kept him out of frontline combat entirely. Most notably, he had lost the use of one eye, suffering an injury that left him with vision in only one. For most soldiers, this would have been disqualifying, a clear reason to be assigned to some role away from the front lines, away from the kind of combat that demanded full physical capability. The Army, quite reasonably, had concerns about a soldier with such an impairment serving in frontline combat. But this soldier refused to accept these limitations. He wanted to fight, and he found ways to keep fighting despite the obstacles placed in his path. When told that his injury should keep him from combat, he insisted on remaining, arguing that he could still do the job, that his impairment did not prevent him from being an effective soldier. He was stubborn, determined, absolutely unwilling to be sidelined. And through this persistence, he managed to stay in the fight, to remain in the combat roles he was determined to fill, proving again and again that his supposed disqualifications did not prevent him from being a formidable warrior. His refusal to accept limits was, in a sense, the foundation of everything remarkable that he would go on to do. Now, we should be honest about the history here, because this soldier's exploits are real and well documented, remarkable as they are, though we will tell the story as a narrative and keep some details general. What follows is grounded in the genuine record of his extraordinary feats, which are so astonishing that they sound almost like legend, but are in fact true. The core is real. A soldier blind in one eye really did, through extraordinary audacity, play a decisive role in liberating a town held by enemy forces, accomplishing through nerve and cunning what should have required a much larger force. The details are recounted to convey the sheer magnitude of his daring. The episode that defines his legend began, as we said, with a reconnaissance mission. He was sent forward to scout a town, to determine whether it was held by the enemy and in what strength, to gather the information that would be needed for an attack. It was a dangerous but relatively straightforward task, the kind of mission that called for stealth and observation rather than direct confrontation. He was to be the eyes of his force, slipping forward to see what lay ahead and then returning with the intelligence. No one expected him to take the town himself. That was not the mission. The mission was simply to look. But as he carried out his reconnaissance, this soldier saw an opportunity, and he made a decision that would transform a scouting mission into one of the most audacious individual actions of the war. Rather than simply observing and reporting, he resolved to act, to use the situation to achieve far more than mere reconnaissance. What he did next required a kind of nerve that is almost impossible to comprehend, a willingness to take a risk so enormous that most people would never even consider it. Alone, with no support, deep in enemy-held territory, he decided that he would try to take the town himself, not through force, which was impossible for a single man, but through audacity and deception. His method was a masterpiece of bluff and psychological warfare. A single soldier cannot defeat a garrison through firepower, but a single soldier, through bold and clever action, might be able to convince that garrison that they faced a much larger force, might be able to create such confusion and alarm that the enemy would believe an attack was underway and choose to flee rather than fight. This was the essence of what he attempted. He moved through the town, creating the impression of a major assault, generating noise and chaos and the appearance of a large attacking force, making the enemy believe that they were being overrun by a substantial body of troops, when in fact they faced only one determined man. The audacity of this is staggering when you consider the details. He was alone, moving through a town full of enemy soldiers, deliberately drawing attention to himself, creating the impression of an attack, all while a single mistake or a single moment of clarity on the enemy's part could have meant his immediate death. He had to maintain the illusion, to keep the enemy off balance, to prevent them from realizing that the overwhelming force they thought they faced was actually one man with extraordinary nerve. It was a performance of incredible boldness, sustained under conditions of mortal danger, requiring split-second judgment and absolute commitment to the bluff. And remarkably, it worked. The enemy garrison, convinced that they faced a major attack, that a substantial force was assaulting the town, made the decision to withdraw rather than stand and fight. They fled, abandoning the town, never realizing that they had been driven out not by an army, but by a single audacious soldier. By the time the deception had run its course, the town was free, liberated not through a costly battle, but through the sheer nerve and cunning of one man who had turned a reconnaissance mission into a one-man liberation. It was an achievement almost without parallel, a single soldier accomplishing what would normally require a significant military operation. There is a profound lesson here about the power of audacity and psychological warfare, about how perception can be more powerful than reality. The soldier did not defeat the garrison through superior force. He defeated them through superior nerve, by manipulating their perception of the situation, by making them believe something that was not true. The garrison fled not because they were actually outnumbered, but because they believed they were. This is the power of psychological warfare, the way that controlling an enemy's perception can achieve what physical force cannot. One man, by shaping what the enemy believed, accomplished what an entire unit might have struggled to do through direct assault. This points to a deeper truth about the nature of courage and its effects. Extreme audacity can create its own reality. When a person acts with such boldness, such complete commitment, such apparent confidence, it can convince others that the bold action is backed by real strength, can create an impression of power that does not actually exist. The soldier's audacity made his bluff believable, because no one could imagine that a single man would act so boldly unless he had real force behind him. His very daring was what made the deception work, a self-reinforcing courage that created the impression of the strength it was pretending to have. Consider, too, what this episode reveals about the man's character and the values that drove him. He could have simply carried out his reconnaissance mission and returned safely, having done his duty. That would have been the sensible, the expected, the safe choice. Instead, he chose to risk everything for the chance to achieve something far greater, to liberate the town, to strike a real blow against the enemy. This willingness to take enormous risks for the sake of achieving something significant, this refusal to settle for the safe and expected, was the essence of who he was. It was the same quality that had driven him to insist on fighting despite his injury, the same refusal to accept limits, the same determination to do more than was asked of him. It is worth reflecting on the irony at the heart of this story. The irony that a soldier deemed unfit for combat accomplished one of the most remarkable feats of individual daring in the war. The army had concerns about his fitness for frontline service because of his injury. And yet this supposedly unfit soldier achieved something that few, if any, of his fully able comrades could have matched. His feat is a powerful rebuke to the idea that a person's worth or capability can be reduced to a checklist of physical qualifications. He proved that the qualities that truly matter in extraordinary circumstances, courage, audacity, determination, cunning, cannot be measured by a physical examination, and that a person dismissed as unfit by official standards can prove to be exceptional when it counts. This carries a profound lesson about the danger of underestimating people based on apparent limitations. The soldier had a clear physical impairment, a real disadvantage that might reasonably have been expected to limit his capabilities, and yet that impairment proved largely irrelevant to his ability to accomplish extraordinary things. What mattered was not his missing eye, but his indomitable spirit, his refusal to be limited, his extraordinary courage and resourcefulness. His story reminds us that people are often capable of far more than their apparent limitations would suggest, that the human spirit can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable, and that we should be cautious about writing anyone off based on a perceived disadvantage. Consider the determination it took for this soldier to even be in a position to accomplish his feat. Before he could liberate a town, he first had to overcome the obstacles to his very participation in combat. He had to insist, repeatedly, on his right to fight, to refuse the sidelining that his injury seemed to warrant, to prove himself again and again. This persistence, this refusal to accept the limits placed upon him, was the necessary foundation for everything that followed. Had he accepted the official judgment that he was unfit for combat, he would never have been in a position to achieve his remarkable feat. His liberation of the town was, in a sense, the culmination of a longer struggle simply to be allowed to fight. There is also something to be said about the sheer improbability of his story, about how it stretches the bounds of what we think is possible. A single soldier liberating a town held by an enemy garrison sounds like the stuff of fiction, the kind of exaggerated heroism found in adventure tales rather than real history. And yet it happened. This reminds us that reality can be stranger and more remarkable than fiction, that real people in real circumstances sometimes accomplish things that would seem unbelievable if they were not documented. The soldier's feat is a testament to the extraordinary possibilities that exist even within the harsh realities of war, the moments when individual human courage and audacity transcend what seems possible. It is worth honoring not just the audacity, but the genuine effectiveness of what the soldier accomplished. This was not merely a reckless stunt that happened to succeed. It was a calculated, if extraordinarily bold, action that achieved a real military objective. The town was genuinely liberated, the enemy genuinely driven out, a real benefit achieved through the soldier's daring. His feat was not just impressive as a display of courage, but valuable as a military accomplishment, securing an objective that mattered. This combination of audacity and genuine effectiveness is what elevates his story from a mere tale of bravado to a genuine feat of arms, a remarkable achievement that made a real difference. What makes this story endure is the way it captures the extraordinary potential of individual human courage and audacity. In a war defined by vast armies and immense forces, here was a single man who, through nerve and cunning alone, accomplished what would normally require a significant military operation. His story is a celebration of the individual, of the difference that one determined person can make, of the way that courage and audacity can transcend apparent limitations and achieve the seemingly impossible. It reminds us that even amid the great impersonal forces of war, the individual still matters, and that one person's extraordinary daring can change the course of events. By the end of the war, this soldier had compiled a record of extraordinary feats that secured his place among the most remarkable individual warriors of the conflict. The liberation of the town was perhaps his most famous achievement, but it was part of a larger pattern of audacity and courage that defined his service. He had overcome the obstacles to his participation in combat, had insisted on fighting despite his injury, and had gone on to accomplish things that few could match. His was a story of triumph over limitation, of audacity rewarded, of an indomitable spirit that refused to be stopped by anything, whether the doubts of his superiors or the dangers of the enemy. So remember the one-eyed soldier, told he was unfit to fight, who insisted on fighting anyway, and who walked alone into a town held by an enemy garrison and bluffed them into fleeing. Remember that he was supposed to be merely scouting and that he chose instead to attempt the seemingly impossible, liberating a town through sheer nerve and cunning. Remember the audacity it took, the willingness to risk everything for the chance to achieve something great. And remember the deep truths his story reveals, that perception can be more powerful than force, that apparent limitations need not define what a person can achieve, and that the extraordinary courage and audacity of a single determined individual can accomplish what seems utterly impossible.